Welcome to the deep dive. You know those trends or behaviors that seem to just explode out of nowhere?
Right.
Well, today we are taking a deep dive into that phenomenon.
It's what we call social epidemics.
Social epidemics.
Yeah. And we're going to uncover the secrets behind how they spread so rapidly. You know how they become contagious? And what makes them tip into, widespread popularity?
So we're not just talking about, catching a cold here.
Oh, no.
We're talking about catching a trend.
Uh-huh.
An idea.
Yeah.
Even a behavior.
Exactly.
Remember those Hush Puppy shoes?
Yeah.
They were practically vintage, and then all of a sudden, everybody was wearing them. Did you ever get swept up in that trend?
I did. That's a perfect example of what we call the law of the few.
Okay, the law of the few.
Yeah, so a small group of highly influential people can spark a trend that spreads like wildfire. And I want to be clear here.
Okay.
These influencers aren't necessarily celebrities or public figures.
Gotcha.
Think of them like the original social media influencers.
Okay, I like that.
You've got your connectors, your mavens, and your salesmen.
Okay, hold on. Let's break that down a little bit.
Sure.
So connectors, are those the people who just seem to know everyone?
Yeah. They're the masters of networking.
Okay.
They're those social butterflies that effortlessly bridge different groups.
Okay.
And then you have the mavens. They're like the information gurus. They are passionate about a particular topic, and they love to share their knowledge with anyone who will listen.
Okay, so they're like the experts.
Yeah.
All right, got it.
And then, of course, you can't forget the salesmen.
Okay, the salesman.
These are the charismatic persuaders.
Gotcha.
The ones who can convince you to try that new restaurant or buy that gadget you didn't even know you needed. They just have that knack for making things sound irresistible.
Yeah.
And for getting you excited about something.
Okay, so we've got these influential folks spreading the word, but it's not just about who's talking, is it? The message itself needs to be catchy, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's where the stickiness factor comes in.
Okay, the stickiness factor.
Yeah, so that's all about making a message memorable. Think about the success of Sesame Street.
Okay.
The creators knew they had to make education fun and engaging for kids.
Right.
So they used repetition, catchy songs, and colorful characters to make those lessons stick. It's not just about throwing information out there.
Right. You
have to craft it in a way that resonates and stays with people.
You're totally right. They took something potentially dull, like teaching ABCs and 123s, and made it completely irresistible. I bet you can still sing some of those Sesame Street songs.
All of them.
But there's more to the equation, though, isn't there?
Yes, the third element is the power of context.
Power of context, okay.
This refers to the influence our environment has on us. Think about it this way. You're more likely to whisper in a library than at a football game.
Okay, yeah.
The environment sets the stage for what's considered acceptable or expected behavior.
So it's like our surroundings are constantly sending us subtle cues that influence how we act and react. That's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It really is, and sometimes those subtle cues can have a huge impact, even shaping the course of events. Let's take the case of Bernie Goetz in the 1980s New York City subway system.
Oh, wow, that's a heavy one.
Yep.
For those who don't know, Bernie Goetz was a guy who shot 4 young men on a subway train.
Right.
It sparked this huge national debate about crime, race, and self-defense.
It really did. It highlights the interplay between individual psychology and the environment. So Goetz was already carrying trauma from a previous mugging.
Okay.
And then you put him on the subway system of that era. It was a time when the subways were grimy, covered in graffiti.
Right.
Crime felt rampant. So that context played a significant role in shaping his perception of threat and his ultimately violent reaction.
It makes you wonder, would the same incident have played out differently if it happened today with our much-improved subway system?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Today, the subways are cleaner, safer, and generally more orderly. The context has shifted. It's impossible to say for sure, but it really highlights how powerful an influence our surroundings can have on our behavior.
It's almost like we're all subconsciously responding to these invisible cues in our environment.
Yeah.
So does that mean we have no control over our actions? Are we just puppets of our surroundings?
No, not at all. While our environment plays a huge role, we still have the ability to make choices. It's about being aware of those subtle influences and choosing to act in accordance with our values.
Okay, that's a bit of relief.
Yeah.
It would be pretty scary to think we're completely at the mercy of our surroundings.
Right.
But this idea of context and influence leads us to another fascinating experiment, the Stanford Prison Experiment.
Ah, yes, a classic study in social psychology. Essentially, researchers created a mock prison in the basement of Stanford University and randomly assigned students to be either guards or prisoners.
And things got really intense really fast.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, they did. The study was supposed to last for 2 weeks, but had to be shut down after only 6 days. The guards, who were regular college students, started acting incredibly authoritarian and even abusive. And the prisoners became passive and withdrawn, showing signs of extreme stress. It was like they all got completely swept up in the roles they were playing, even though it was just an experiment.
So even in a carefully controlled environment, the power of the situation, the roles they were assigned, overwhelmed their individual personalities. It's a little unnerving to think about, honestly.
The Stanford prison experiment is a stark reminder of how easily we can be influenced by our social roles and surroundings, and how those external factors can sometimes override our internal sense of self. It's a powerful demonstration of the power of context and action.
So if our environment can shape our behavior so profoundly, it begs the question, how do we use that knowledge to create positive change? If we understand how these social forces work, can we harness them for good?
That's a question we'll explore further as we dive deeper into the world of social epidemics. But for now, I'll leave you with this thought. If even seemingly insignificant details can have such a powerful impact, what subtle cues are shaping your life and choices right now?
It really makes you stop and think, about all those tiny little things that are nudging us in one direction or another. Okay, so we talked about those powerful forces at play.
Right.
Like the law of the few.
Yep.
The stickiness factor,
Uh-huh.
and the power of context.
Right.
Now let's dive into a different kind of social epidemic, the world of ideas,
Okay.
on how they spread. Have you ever noticed how certain ideas just seem to take root and grow within your social circle?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's like there's this invisible network of information sharing that's constantly happening all around us. This is where the concept of transactive memory comes in.
Transactive memory, okay.
Yeah. So it's this idea that we don't just store information in our own minds.
Okay.
We actually distribute it across our social networks.
So instead of trying to remember everything ourselves, we rely on other people to hold certain pieces of information for us.
Exactly.
Like, I know my best friend is like a walking encyclopedia when it comes to history.
Uh-huh.
So I don't even try to compete. If I have a history question, I go straight to her.
That's exactly it. It's like creating a collective brain where everyone contributes their expertise. Think about it in terms of a family. Parents often rely on their kids for tech support,
Right.
while the kids might depend on their parents for knowledge about family history or cooking.
Yeah.
It's a really efficient system.
It is. It's fascinating how we naturally form these networks of shared knowledge. It's like having a personalized human search engine at our disposal. But how does this apply to the spread of ideas beyond our immediate circles?
Well, imagine a workplace that's structured to take advantage of this transactive memory. One company that does this really well is W.O. Gore and Associates, the makers of Gore-Tex. They intentionally keep their teams small, like around 150 people or less.
Why is that?
Well, they believe that smaller teams foster stronger connections and a more effective flow of information.
Gotcha.
It's like creating a network of mini experts who all know each other's strength.
So instead of having these huge departments where people barely know each other,
Right.
they create these tight-knit communities where knowledge can spread more organically.
Precisely. And this structure has helped them become known for innovation. Ideas can flow more freely, people know who to go to for specific expertise, and collaboration just becomes so much easier.
It makes you realize how much our social structures impact the way ideas take root and spread. But let's be realistic.
Okay.
Not every workplace operates like that. Sometimes even great ideas struggle to gain traction, especially when they need to jump from a specialized group to a wider audience.
That's a crucial point. It's not enough to just have a great idea. You need to be able to communicate it effectively and make it appealing to a broader audience. This is where those translators we talked about earlier come in, the connectors, mavens, and salesmen. They can bridge the gap between specialized knowledge and the mainstream.
They're like the cultural ambassadors of the idea world. They make complex concepts accessible and engaging for everyone.
Exactly. Think about the anti-smoking campaigns that focus on the health risks. Those messages are important, but they often fail to resonate with teenagers because they come across as preachy or out of touch.
Right. It's like, yeah, I get it. Smoking is bad for me.
Right.
But everyone cool is doing it. I don't want to be a social outcast.
Exactly.
The message just isn't sticky enough to compete with the allure of fitting in.
To combat a social epidemic, you really need to understand its appeal, its stickiness. In the case of teen smoking, it's often about image, rebellion, and social acceptance.
So how do you make not smoking sticky? How do you shift the social perception so that lighting up suddenly seems, well, uncool?
That's the challenge. It's not just about presenting facts, it's about reframing the narrative.
Right.
Perhaps focusing on the immediate consequences like bad breath or the fact that smoking makes you smell like an ashtray.
Right, because teenagers are obsessed with their image and social standing.
Yes.
So maybe we need to hit them where it hurts, their coolness factor.
Exactly. Or we could emphasize how smoking actually limits your freedom. It controls you, dictates your breaks, makes you dependent on a substance.
Teenagers hate being told what to do.
Yeah.
Maybe the key is to rebrand not smoking as the ultimate act of rebellion.
Okay.
Rebellion against the tobacco industry.
I like that. That's clever. It plays into their desire for autonomy and individuality.
But let's face it, teenagers are going to experiment.
Right?
It's part of growing up.
Yeah.
We can't shield them from everything.
Of course. And the just say no approach often backfires because it doesn't acknowledge the reality of teenage curiosity. It's that forbidden fruit phenomenon. The more you tell someone they can't have something, the more they want it.
So instead of preaching abstinence, maybe a better approach is to equip them with the knowledge and strategies they need to make informed choices.
Exactly. It's about harm reduction. If you're going to experiment, here's how to minimize the risks.
Yeah.
It's a much more realistic and pragmatic approach.
It's like the difference between telling someone not to swim and teaching them how to swim safely.
That's a perfect analogy. It's about empowering young people to make their own decisions while giving them the tools to navigate those choices safely. But shifting gears a bit, let's delve deeper into another layer of social epidemics.
Yeah.
The concept of a tipping person.
A tipping person. Okay. That sounds interesting. So we've talked about how certain types of people, like our connectors, mavens, and salesmen, can influence the spread of trends and ideas.
Right.
But is there something more to it than just personality type?
Absolutely. Sometimes it's not just about who they are, but also about the specific role they play in a particular social context.
Okay.
Let's go back to the famous story of Paul Revere's Midnight Ride.
Okay.
So he wasn't the only writer spreading the word that night.
Really?
Another writer, William Dawes, set out with the same message, but his ride had a much smaller impact.
Why is that? Was Paul Revere, like, a better writer? Did he have a faster horse?
It's more nuanced than that. The difference lies in their social networks and how they interacted with the people they encountered.
Okay.
Paul Revere was deeply embedded in the revolutionary movement. He knew exactly who to talk to, who would be most receptive to his message, and who was most likely to spread it further.
So it wasn't just about shouting, "The British are coming." It was about strategically targeting the right people, those who could amplify the message.
Exactly. He acted as a catalyst, setting off a chain reaction that galvanized the colonists. Dawes, on the other hand, lacked those key social connections and influence.
It's like the difference between throwing a pebble into a pond and dropping a boulder. Revere created ripples that spread far and wide.
I love that analogy. It highlights the importance of understanding social networks and the role of those tipping people in spreading information and sparking action.
So if we want to start a social epidemic, we need to find those key individuals who can act as amplifiers. But how do we identify them? Is it some innate quality, or is it something they develop?
That's a question researchers are still exploring. It likely involves a combination of personality, social skills, and the specific context that they operate in. There's no magic formula for creating a tipping person.
So it's a complex mix of factors that we're only beginning to understand.
Right.
But even without a precise formula, we can learn from the examples of those who have successfully sparked movements. They often possess certain qualities: charisma, strong social networks, a deep understanding of their audience, and a passion for their message.
Absolutely. It's not just about who you know. It's about how you connect with them, how you inspire them to take action. It's about creating a spark that ignites a chain reaction, setting off a social epidemic that can transform the world.
Okay, that's pretty powerful stuff. But it also raises a question. Can negative behaviors spread like epidemics too? Can we catch bad habits or destructive tendencies from the people around us? It's kind of scary to think about, honestly. that negativity could be contagious like
Yeah,
that.
it is. It really is.
So, we've seen how positive trends and ideas can spread like wildfire, but can the same be said for like negative behaviors?
Sadly, yeah, the answer seems to be yes. Think about, copycat crimes,
Okay.
where like one act of violence inspires others.
Like the tragic wave of school shootings that followed Columbine,
Right.
it felt like this dark virus spreading from one community to the next.
Exactly. And the intense media coverage,
Yeah.
the focus on the perpetrators, it seemed to create a blueprint for other troubled individuals. It's a chilling example of how negative social forces can be amplified.
It's unsettling to think about. But if negativity can be contagious, does that mean we're all susceptible? Are we powerless to resist these darker influences?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, while we're undoubtedly influenced by our environment and the people around us, we're not simply passive recipients.
Right.
We have the capacity for critical thinking, moral judgment, and resistance.
So it's not a foregone conclusion that we'll automatically succumb to negative influences. We have a choice, a responsibility to push back against those forces.
Absolutely. It's about being aware of those influences, understanding their power, and choosing to align our actions with our values.
It's a reminder that we're not just individuals, but also members of a community.
Yes.
We have a role to play in shaping that social context around us. But let's shift gears a bit, huh?
Okay.
We've been talking about some pretty heavy topics.
Yeah.
Crime, violence, addiction. Let's explore a lighter example of a social epidemic.
Right. Fashion trends.
Fashion. A perfect example of a social epidemic in action. Trends emerge,
Right.
spread like wildfire, and then fade just as quickly. It often leaves us wondering, what were we thinking? I'm still trying to figure out those low-rise jeans from the early 2000s. Who thought those were a good idea?
Well, fashion is often about pushing boundaries, experimenting with new looks, and expressing individuality. And what's considered fashionable is always evolving. It's influenced by cultural trends, the media, celebrities, and that ever-elusive cool factor.
Right. So how do these fashion epidemics even start? Is there like a secret fashion council somewhere that dictates what we'll all be wearing next season?
No, not quite. While designers and fashion houses introduce new styles, the real tipping point often comes from the streets,
Okay.
from those early adopters who are constantly seeking out the next big thing.
It's like those trendsetters that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
They're the ones who sniff out those emerging styles before they hit the mainstream. Can you think of any fashion trends that you were, like, ahead of the curve on?
Well, I wouldn't call myself a trendsetter, but I do enjoy seeing how styles evolve and spread. It's fascinating to observe how something that starts as like a niche look can suddenly become, well, ubiquitous.
But what makes a particular fashion trend sticky? Why do some styles just become massive while others fade into obscurity?
That's the million-dollar question in the fashion world, isn't it? It's a complex mix of aesthetics, practicality, and cultural relevance.
So it has to look good, be somewhat wearable, and resonate with, like, the spirit of the times.
Exactly. Think about the rise of athleisure wear in recent years. It's comfortable, versatile, and reflects our increasingly casual lifestyles.
Yeah.
It tapped into a cultural shift, and that's what made it so popular.
It's amazing how something as seemingly superficial as fashion can actually reflect these deeper cultural trends and societal values.
I agree. Fashion is a powerful form of self-expression, and the trends that take hold often tell us a lot about the world we live in.
It's like a cultural barometer, reflecting our anxieties, aspirations, and desires. But you know what? Let's switch gears one last time and talk about a different kind of social phenomena. The evolution of email.
Ugh, email. Such a fascinating case study. When it first emerged, it was revolutionary. It was a way to connect with anyone, anywhere, instantly.
It was like the Wild West of communication, a vast open frontier for messages to flow freely.
Precisely. And for a while, it seemed like email would change the way we interact, breaking down barriers and creating a more connected world. Do you remember how exciting it was to get your first email account?
I do. It felt like this whole new world had opened up. But then, as email became more common, something interesting happened.
What's that?
Our inboxes started overflowing.
Oh, yeah.
And we developed a kind of like immunity to all those messages.
It's like our minds developed resistance to a virus.
Yeah.
We became overwhelmed, desensitized, and we just started ignoring messages, filtering out the noise and prioritizing communication from people we already knew and trusted.
So the ease and accessibility that initially made email so appealing ultimately contributed to its decline as a tool for like widespread influence.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even in the digital age, the principles of social epidemics still apply.
Yeah.
Messages that want to cut through the clutter, they need to be compelling, relevant, and emotionally resonant. They need to grab our attention and make us want to share them.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into social epidemics, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. Think critically about the information you encounter, question your assumptions, and be aware of the subtle ways in which you're influenced by social forces.
And remember, you have the power to be an agent of change. You can choose to spread kindness, generosity, and inspiration. You can create those ripples of positive influence in your own circles.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of social epidemics. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.